Your monthly subscription box from postflybox.com includes all the materials needed to tie a dozen flies, along with some extra goodies. This March Brown jig can be used to imitate both a March Brown nymph as well as an emerger. In addition, it also happens to work as a general attractor pattern. To start, pick up one of the barbless angled jig hooks and one of the copper beads. Insert the hook point into the small hole of the bead and work the bead up and around to behind the hook eye. You can then get the whole assembly firmly secured in the jaws of your tying vise. Load a bobbin with the spool of tan unithread. Get the thread started on the hook shank at the back edge of the bead and take a few wraps rearward, then back forward to where you started. Reach in with your tying scissors and snip off the extra tag end of thread. Pick up the whole coil of solder wire and get hold of one end. On top of the hook shank, insert that end into the bead until it stops and take wraps of tying thread to secure it there. Bring the whole coil of wire around and take touching wraps with it rearward down the hook shank but behind your tying thread. This means you're lifting up on the thread with each wrap, which helps to keep them close together. After 6 or 7 turns, use your tying thread to anchor the wire and break it off close. Take a few more thread wraps to further secure the wire, then end with your tying thread hanging just back from the hook point. Pick up one of the teal flank feathers and strip off all the lower fuzzy and short fibers. Pull down a dozen or so fibers on one side of the feather, and while keeping their tips aligned, strip them free from the stem. Measure to form a tail about a hook shank in length and transfer that measurement rearward to the start of the hook bend. Take wraps of tying thread to firmly anchor the fibers to the top of the hook shank all the way back to the start of the bend. You can then pull up on the butt ends and trim them off close at the back edge of the wire wraps. Relocate your tying thread forward to about the hook point. Without using the delicate tips of your tying scissors, snip a 3-inch length of the copper wire free from the coil. Butt one end of the wire against the solder wire wraps on top of the hook shank and take wraps of tying thread to secure it. Make sure it's bound down really well all the way to the base of the tail. Then once again, advance your thread forward so it hangs at about the hook point. Tan dubbing is used to create the body of the fly. Pluck an ample clump free from the packet. Pull down on your bobbin to expose 4 inches of tying thread and use the dubbing to produce a slender 3-inch long noodle. Start taking wraps with the noodle so the dubbing begins right at the base of the tail. Continue taking touching wraps up the hook shank to form the body of the fly, ideally ending with bare thread at the back edge of the bead. Get hold of the wire and start making open spiral wraps with it to rib and segment the fly. When you reach your tying thread, use it to firmly anchor the wire, then helicopter to break it off close. Retrieve what remains of the teal feather and check to see if its tips are roughly aligned. If there are any fibers that are much shorter than the others, strip them off. With the feathers dull or backside facing you, lay it fanned out against the near side of the hook and take a loose wrap around all the fibers to kind of smear them around the hook shank behind the bead. Pull rearward on the bundle until the tips of the fibers extend about a hook length in front of the back edge of the bead. If you need to, continue to work the fibers around so they encircle the entire hook shank. Once you're satisfied with their coverage, take a few more nice tight thread wraps to really lock things down. Reach in with your tying scissors and snip the lower portion of the feather off as close as possible. Pull the forward pointing tips rearward and take wraps of tying thread behind the bead to keep the fibers pointed back. Once again, pick up the tan dubbing, but this time pull just a small wisp free from the packet. Use this to create a very slender noodle on your tying thread that's only 1.5 inches in length. While pulling rearward on the collar fibers to keep them out of the way, take wraps with a dubbing noodle right behind the bead to cover up the bare thread wraps. Finally, get hold of your whip finish tool and use it to do a 4 or 5 turn whip finish, seat the knot well, and snip your tying thread free. If you have any unruly fibers, now's a good time to trim them off. Although not absolutely critical, having the teal fibers evenly distributed around the hook shank is something to work toward. You don't have to wait for the March Browns to become active to use this fly. It absolutely can be fished year-round.